So my name's John Till. I'm the founding director of Thinking Place, and we've been working with the three towns in Torbay over the last year or so, and you're going to see the results of this work. You'll see my colleague Peter there. He'll introduce himself in a minute. So I think the important bit about what this piece of work is all about, I think, is it came from a view from the private sector and the public sector that there was not a clear narrative for Torbay in terms, particularly externally, to government, to potential investors, relocators, etc., and that needed dealing with. And I suppose in dealing with that meant looking at a narrative for Torbay as a collective, but importantly looking at how to give greater emphasis to the towns as well, so that they had their own narrative, their own identity, on the basis that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's worth saying with this, and you'll probably see as we go along, this is not simply some sort of glossy marketing exercise. This is very much about changing the place to being place-led as opposed to organisation-led. It's about greater leadership. It's about wider leadership. It's about greater collaboration. It's about an improved highlighting of the assets and opportunities that there are across the place. However, obviously, if we've got this story of place, then we need to tell the story. And the session today is really about how you can do that. And telling the story can be done in numerous ways. As I said, it's not just purely about marketing, and you'll see some examples of that as we go through the session. So there is quite a lot of content. There's quite a lot of content because obviously we're going to talk about Torbay, but we're going to talk about the individual towns. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to focus as we go along on the theme or themes of each story, and Peter will talk through about how they're brought to life. For you, you're able to ask a question at any point using the Q&A. So if you can just use the Q&A facility, and if you've got a question, type it in. Don't wait to the end. If it occurs to you, just ask it and we'll try and pick it up when we get to the end. So at that point, I will pass on to Peter and he will take us through the session.
Great. Just going to share screen. Sharing screen. Just going to from the start. Hi, my name is Peter Anderson. I'm creative director of Thinking Place and director of Peter Anderson Studios. We've worked with Place for over 10 years, working with countries, counties, cities, towns, villages, and even developments. So we've got a lot of experience under our belt. With my other hat on, I'm a director of a studio that brings television stories to life with visual languages and branding. So the two are very much parallel, although they may not seem it at first. So this is one example. This is Northern Ireland. And in a way, there is just a mass here of examples of communication, including television, radio, and various other experiences. Livingstone, Zambia. What was important here with the strategic story was about taking some of their very special stories, but more importantly, it was about activating their local talent. And this is just one example of that. This was something to help Victoria Falls compete with Zimbabwe, but it was very much about local people creating local stories, but creating an international phenomenon, which was this sculpture park. So strategy very practically brought to life within the community. This is another example. This is Lancaster, and you can see here this was a big event where they're talking about bringing the Eden project to the north of England. Smaller scale example with the town of Malden, But you can see here, once you have your strategic thinking gives you a point of difference, and that point of difference helps to create a mass amount of tools and elements, including, in this case, you can see very unique local signage, which effectively was born out of the strategic story. Closer to home, New Haven, and what I mean by that, that's a coastal story here. And one of the things that was important with the thinking with New Haven was about taking opportunities to make small wins and activate their relationship with the coast more. So this is one example of that. This is a box park that we helped create, and effectively, this is a very quick way to animate your coastal experience. And again, all the visual language and branding from the wider place could be utilized for free by the place. Again, that can also be thinking. This is a sub-brand for the National Trust called Time Machine. And part of the importance of this was the event itself brought the place together, but it also did something that was very practical. It helped capture the oral history of a place. And that moved all over the country doing this. So thinking about film and television, again, that's about storytelling. That's about finding the right look and feel to fit the right story. To some degrees, it's easier to grasp on the shorthand. So you can see the simplicity, but yet characterfulness here of Mandela. Again, you've got two different audiences here. You've got MGM, mainstream, the hustle. But then on the other hand, you've got an art house film by the famous Chinese artist, Ai Weiwei, Human Flow. Both have a very different visual language because they're about communicating to a very different audience. So again, you can see here, the mass of different types of communications just have a different look and feel. And I guess to simplify that, if you look at a period drama has a certain feel and a certain set of rules about it that tells us we're looking back in history, whereas a modern show has a different set of rules, And again, with this, not only did we do the branding, we often will do the graphic communication, which in television more and more is becoming the fourth character within television programs as technology progresses. But this is a very early on example of this, where we created a new visual language to help, the drama communicate in a way that it couldn't without using words. So in terms of telling Torbay's story, the first thing that we think about really is photography. Photography is the thing that we engage with, we understand. But what's important about photography is it shouldn't just be photographs of town centres. It should be thought about, and it should be competitive. It should effectively bring to life your story in a way that's very thoughtful. And that's just not what you take photographs of, that's also how you take the photographs. So I've got a couple of examples here. So one example is Holy Island. What was important to them, a couple of things that were important to them with this notion, this rugged Celtic feeling that spiritualism, the land, the topology, the natural assets were the things that dominated their story. So what that meant is when we were photographing the place, simply by putting the camera into the sun, you emphasize that feeling of magic and spiritualism that was connected to the land. The other thing that's very important, it's all very well to have historical assets, but you need to animate your assets and make them relevant to today. Another thing that was important to them was the land was bigger than the people. So very, very simply, in art directing the photography, the land takes the bigger place and the people take the smaller place, because that's something that was one of their points of difference. In contrast to that, Coventry is very much about innovation, technology, enterprise and learning. So again, that means you don't just wander into your town centre, you show off those points of difference. So you go into Jaguar Land Rover, you show their innovation in research and technology. You go to the university, you show what's going on under the surface. You're saying this city is different and special for these reasons. And then in a more simpler level, Aldershot was very much about repositioning itself as somewhere that used to be known as Army, but as somewhere that was changing all that and repositioning itself as a family destination. So very, very simply, with the photography, you're using the old Army assets, but you're putting family in there. So it's quite literally taking those assets that existed and positioning them in a way that's relevant to the strategic thinking, which is effectively your place story. So when it comes to Torbay, you know, you're in a wonderful position that you have 3 towns that all own the bay and that can all claim the assets of the bay. You have, I mean, John, do you want to?
Yeah. No, I think the important bit with Torbay is it manages to pull together some very, very important aspects. I mean, first of all, an absolute premier marine and natural environment, which is very unspoilt in many ways, yet sort of holds within it sort of 2 key thematic areas there of technology, you know, photonics and all of the businesses and the high-tech businesses that I think for most people will be a complete surprise that they're there, but we have a cluster of them and a growing cluster of them. So there's globally important research, development and delivery happening by this natural environment. And part of the reason it is happening there is because of that natural environment. And at the same time, that environment is allowing a whole host of activities to go on. And there is, of course, is potential for so much more. So that's on the water, but it's also in the wider geography of Dartmoor and etc. and across the rurality of the place. So you have a very strong offering of where a lot of it is a surprise. And I think that's what we talked about when we said with the story, we want to make sure we can take this externally because it's important for people to know where that opportunity lies. And if government don't understand your role in terms of that business offer, as well as the visitor offer, then that is a problem. And hence with the communication that follows from it. And that's why on this call, we've got people who, there's people who do design and communication, but this also impacts on the whole of the environment from public realm to signage to any possible way you could communicate. You know, that's why it's important that we use all of those mediums to get the message across. Okay, Peter.
So at the seat, okay.
So we've got the 3 there, but what we'll do is if we go on to, I think, is Brixham coming up now?
Brixham's coming up now. So I guess just to sort of bounce forward, what we're doing with the photography here is, you know, this is our first set of photography. We're identifying, showing off these assets that exist within your strategic story. In the same way we did with the other places, we're looking to how do we show the premier marine and natural experience? Where is Tech by the Bay? You know, what's happening in terms of adventure that's going on? And again, you'll see as I go through, you know, the individual towns have their individual themes, and those themes, they own Torbay themes. So that's part of their unique story, but they also have something unique as well. So with Brixham, you have creative food and fishing fusion. With Paignton, you've got family fun on the foreshore. You've got a centre for enterprise, electronics and entrepreneurship. With Torquay, you've got leading on leisure and lifestyle from the sea. And as I say, you know, as John just said, you know, Brixham, to start off, looking at that creative food and fishing fusion, but also, you know, the tech for the bay, the technology that's there will always come through because that's part of the place story. I mean, what a beautiful place to start off with, and what a wonderful color palette to work with. You know, so that creativity exists. There's lots of SMEs out there doing wonderful things in the place. You know, in some cases it's behind the scenes, in some places with the markets, it's there, it's very overt, but there's this lovely relationship in terms of that relationship with the sea. And you have that extra story, you know, the farm to fork story. You have fishermen going out, you have that actually being processed there at the bay and brought into the restaurant on a very high level quality. So you've got a wonderful connection to the land with those types of businesses, you know, and they're, you know, the saying of one of the restaurants, tomorrow's fish are still in the sea, is absolutely true. And not many places can have both business and, I guess, high quality lifestyle connected to the same place.
Yeah,
So,
I think the key bit with this, as Peter's saying, is it's the combination of things. It's that being able to sit in a restaurant and see industry actually happening, the creativity that is craft and art, but also the creativity linked to food and events and things like that. So it is, the place is very special because of that coming together of things. And as I said, the creative food and fishing fusion, that's kind of our central theme. It's not a strap line. We're not saying we necessarily use that for marketing, but it's kind of guiding the strategic thinking.
you know, and again, that creativity also, you know, you have a you know, Torbay owns a very famous writer, Ina Blyton, and not Ina Blyton, sorry.
I was going to say, that's a new
Agatha
one.
Christie. Ina Blyton lives up the road from me. Agatha Christie. And you know, and that influence isn't just on things like painting, it's about thinking, it's about writing. But you know, again, the you know, the wider story, you know, the Tech by the Bay story. I mean, imagine working there. You know, one of the employees I met there, I last saw at my wedding, bizarrely, and he was telling me that he canoes to work every day. I mean, who can canoe to work every day? It's utterly incredible. So, you know, there's the things that people know about in terms of Brixham, but then there's also the things behind the scenes, like you're seeing here, which are hugely important and should be talked about as well. You know, it's an incredibly exciting place. And then you think of Paignton. You know, most people think of it as family fun, but it's not just family fun. It is actually a center for electronics and entrepreneurship. It's there, you know, and on small scale and large scale. So, you know, there's the things that we know and we're very proud of, as you should be, because, you know, what a beautiful natural asset. You know, what a great place to bring a family up. You know, with all the different experiences and things that you can do there, you know, so it's a wonderful place. But it's not just that. It's about the little businesses, you know, the hotels, the yoga clubs, you know, the cafes that are, you know, the change that's happening to towns in terms of them evolving to fit a more leisure focused place. Absolutely stunning, you know. And then of course you've got your cinema where, you know, Agatha Christie had her own seat, you know, booked, that nobody could have for the year out, which is, you know, currently in restoration. So, you know, the elements are here, and the elements of the strategy are just they're just there in oodles. But a lot of people, they're behind the scenes. They just look, oh, here's a town centre, here's a beach. But what's really important is combining those assets, putting them forward and using them in the different ways to help the place. So with Torquay, the theme here in terms of leading on leisure and lifestyle by the sea, I mean, as a hub, it's got oodles of assets. You know, you've got your adventure, you've got your beautiful rocky landscapes. You know, you've got your unique, I guess, physical assets, wonderful, but also, you could be working, you could be on your phone, answering your emails, looking at that. You can work. And in this new world where more people are living and working from home, again, there's just such a wonderful opportunity. People are just leaving places like London by the Groves, and they're rethinking about what they can do in this new mobile environment. And again, beautiful place, with not just leisure assets and natural assets, but again, places to go, places to eat, things to do, views, and the ability to work. Just pull, in the world that we live in, you can pull a laptop pretty much anywhere now, and get on with your work. And you can see that just in that, in the local area. So that offers a lot.
And I guess the thing with this that's important is the challenge that the theme puts down of leading on leisure and lifestyle. It's your best known brand, Torquay, but it has to deliver that premier experience. It has to do probably more around the marina area where there's lots of opportunity. It has to repurpose things like the pavilion, the Debenhams opportunity. That's all part of making sure that it is going to lead on leisure and lifestyle. You've got to get those things done. So the theme, as I say, yes, it's reflecting the place, but it's reflecting how the place also needs to change and adapt. And we've got to tell that forward-looking story.
So I guess one of the tools that you've got, which has come out of your strategy, is a visual language. So I guess, what is a visual language? A visual language, like photography, is simply another one of your tools. It's always important. The most important thing to remember is after these oodles and oodles of research, we funnel down to a point of saying, what's your point of difference? And that point of difference then gets identified by you, by the stakeholders of the place, and that gets distilled by these themes. And the themes really, as John said, the themes are not slogans, they're effectively points of difference, a point of difference to focus on, to celebrate. You could have 100 slogans, you could have 100 different ways of doing that. So your photography is your prime way of doing that, but a visual language is effectively another way of supporting and helping, quite simply, to illustrate that strategic thinking. So a visual language, as I say, is like a piece of glue that or a watermark that sits in the background that helps identify with this modern thinking. So its advantage is it's not like a logo. A logo is something that effectively a company has to identify its values in a very direct way. A place is a bit more fuzzy, it's a bit more woolly, and a place has multiple businesses that have their own stories, so it needs to be able to support them with something much softer. And it also needs to be flexible, so something that can be put on a banner or be put on umbrella like we saw with New Haven, but it can also just sit very, very quietly in the background. So, and in terms of why would you use a visual language, why is it useful to a place? So a really simple example of this is Chesterfield. Small town, market town, really, there's nothing wrong with it. Everything's working fine. It just needs a bit of a shake. It needs a modern awakening. In terms of its themes, its inventiveness, is something that needed to be nurtured. It's one of these places that would surprise you that it's the first for many, 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 many things that are absolutely fascinating. But still, you can't think of somewhere like Chesterfield, a bit like Paris with the Eiffel Tower, without thinking of the Chesterfield twisted spire. 90% of the businesses use it as their logo. It almost becomes Chesterfield's just a twisted spire. So if you take the strategy in mind, and if you created it just as an identity, you would create a twisted spire with a modern awakening. You would look at the detail of it. You'd look at the thing that made it quirky, as we've done here, and you'd illustrate that in a way that looked forward. But an identity can only go that far. If you think about the theme in terms of nurturing that inventiveness, you're taking the history here, and by creating a visual language, you're taking the elements and the detail that made the Twisted Spire special, and you're using that as a metaphor for inventiveness. So you're taking the familiar and you're developing it into an expressive language that talks about the things the place has to do. But in a way, the fact that visual language is very much an illustration and is born from a strategy is one thing. The other thing is the practical use that you can use with it. So again, you go to Chesterfield, you go all over the place. You go to bus shelters, you go to local signage, you go to some of the schools, you go to various places. They use their visual language. You know, their visual language is connected to their story and reminds people of one of the things that makes them special. The other thing about it is it can be used by partners. So on the right-hand side here, you've got two developers. You know, you've got Knight Frank. They've got their own colors. They've got their own website. They've got their own typeface. They've got their own way of designing. But if you look very, very quietly, you can see the visual language, just like a white watermark, is just seeping through, because this organization is very proud to be associated with Chesterfield and wants to link to its unique story. On the left-hand side, you've got something produced by the council, which is a much more direct banner, which is celebrating the place. It's actually taking even further that connection to the Twisted Spire and its slatting architecture, and it's using that as part of its design mechanism. So it can be used very directly, or it can be used very, very quietly. So in terms of the context of the visual language, you know, and what it needs to project, you know, we need a visual language to focus on the knowledge economy. We need to help activate entrepreneurs, looking at SMEs, research and development. You know, small is big for Torbay. Those little enterprises are incredibly important, you know, whether it be the yoga school, whether it be the local cafe, whether it be a small tech business that's starting up, they're all incredibly important. You know, the relationships with the university, you know, how you can widen the technology offer, you know, but also this thing which not many places can claim, which is you guys genuinely offer an incredible quality of life, an incredible lifestyle and access to natural assets that most people would kill for, but also local community assets as well that are on a high level that should be celebrated, you know, and the two fit together in terms of why businesses are drawn there and the natural beauty of the place, which again is quite unique. So the elements that normally you'd shy away from in a place because you'd be focusing on the business and technology are part of the reason why your business and technology is focused with your place. So when we think about Torbay, you know, we're looking to illustrate a premier marine and natural experience. You know, we're also trying to illustrate tech by the bay and a hub for active adventures. The important thing here is the bay, you know, those physical assets make these things happen. Again, our 3 towns come into play, and every time we talk about Torbay, each of the towns owns Torbay's strategy. You know, the beauty of effectively a collection of assets is only an advantage for a town rather than a disadvantage. But of course, it has its individual points of difference that are part of that. So it has the bay's point of difference, and it has its own points of difference. So with creative strategic direction in terms of thinking about creating a visual language that does this job of holding together or giving each town the bay, but allowing each town to express itself, we had to create something that, you know, that did celebrate your marine and coast, because that's the thing that comes first. you know, something that also is confident, quite simple, is both natural, but is also putting that creativity forward in a very simple way. You know, this is a multi-layered place, but it's also an artistic place with oodles of natural assets. So our visual language here had to get across that familiar feeling of coast, of seaside, but it also had to have an artistic flair to it. So Torbay, as it is, very simply and confidently takes the colours of the place, the colours and textures, and brings our bay to life in a confident, simple way. When it gets exciting is when you start to apply it. Of course, you know, you have a logo type because that's useful in very specific circumstances, but in most circumstances, I wouldn't recommend using it. It's just there as one of the many assets. When you start to play with the simple confidence of your story and the expression of that story within Torbay, you'll see this is made up of all the colours and elements of Brixham, Paignton and Torquay. And then when you start to apply it, it starts to be fun, you know. It can be applied in a multiple set of ways, whether you're using it as a watermark that helps make photography more unique, whether you're using it in its own right. It has a kind of multiple uses. So, you know, the important thing is this is a system which is about bringing the bay together, but also being able to use by the businesses in the bay. So you might not even notice here, but one of the squares just next to clean room has your visual language nautical stripes, but very softly, not catching the eye, just as an option that if you want to find more about the place, you can click that, not interfering with the brand. And then here again, in the top right-hand side, you have it as used by one of the local stakeholders, but again, very much having a secondary role to the individual business and what it needs to communicate. But more importantly, the business is saying, we're really proud of our place and we want to show our place assets. And that might be as simple as having a button that takes you to a gallery that shows you the beauty of the place. And if that does nothing other than stop young people from leaving, then it's doing a very powerful job. And again, you can just see it here on a photograph. So Brixham has a completely different set of colors. It also has a different logo type, which connects to its fishing story and its creative story. So it has its own unique expression. It has its own unique colors. And those colors, as you can see, come from the place itself. They're literally grabbed from the place. So it can equally bend and use Torbay, but it can also use its own expression. It can also use its own colors and its own logo type. So it can choose to be part of the bigger family when that makes more sense, maybe when it's levying government or it's trying to pull its weight together to have a go against bigger assets like larger cities or counties. But it can also show that creativity and those colors that are unique to it by itself as a town. Again, very simple, very nautical, plays on seaside, plays on nautical, plays on the land, but also has a very simple creative flair to it. Again, used here with partner brands. A couple of examples, slightly more boldly here on the top right-hand side, but always playing a secondary role in terms of the stakeholders. Seen here with some photography. And then you look at Torquay. Torquay has a different color palette. You know, Torquay feels different from Brixham. Therefore, it should look different. Its logo type should feel different. So again, the things that unite the bay are there, but it has its own unique expression. And you can see, again, examples of that. And as I say, driven by the place and the place's palette. Again, with partner brands. And then Paignton, different expression again, much more fun, much more playfulness. It has a logo type, which is softer, more family friendly, but it's still part of the bay. It still owns all the assets of the bay. So this allows, in both cases, it to work two ways. It can be family fun on the foreshore, you know, which is an important thing, but it can also be a center for enterprise and economics and entrepreneurship. Part of that is your use of communication, the photographs that you choose to use, and part of that story. But again, something that is very, very special is actually the fact that you can canoe to work is one of the important stories to tell when you're talking about your tech story. That's why businesses locate here. So again, seen here used in a more traditional way, or here in a way where you almost wouldn't notice it. It's just a tiny little bit on the top left-hand side that's saying very quietly, like a watermark, we've got our thing to talk about, but we're proud to be part of the place. So, and this all comes back together with Torbay. So, you know, all those assets and all those colors get brought all the way back together, and that's really important. As you can see, you have your different typography in each place, but each place also owns the Torbay typography. So the purpose of this workshop is all about looking at these themes, and you as stakeholders and people who are invested in the place, really what we're doing here is we're saying to you, how can you take your unique point of difference and tell the world about it? How can you bring more investment to Torbay? How can you bring more investment to Brixham, to Paignton, to Torquay? How can you get businesses to want to locate here? So looking at your points of difference, how do you activate them? How do you express them? You know, that's why we're here today. It's looking at that. It's saying, how are we going to tell these stories and bring them out here? You've seen a little bit of that with your visual language and your photography, but there's multiple ways of doing that. So we have a thing called a place story. And really what we want you to do is think about how can your place story of Torbay and your town influence and change your environment? How do you tell somebody who doesn't know there is tech at the bay here? How do you get that across? How do you change your behavior, you know, in terms of things that you do? What events can you do? You know, are they specialized fishing events? Are they food events where you're making a point that what you create and what is here in terms of local things found in the sea, how is that then engineering or creating new restaurants and new food experiences? You know, what are you doing with your communications? You know, how are you, I guess, putting strap lines or putting different forms of communication into your points of difference? And again, what products, you know, what products can you create? What's your signage doing? What's your bags doing, mugs doing? You know, there's a multitude of products that can be made that celebrates place and helps you compete against other places and thrive. As I say, whether that be within a community, whether that be about recruitment, whether that be about levying government for money, there's a multitude of ways that you can use your place story. So please, please think about your themes and think, how are they relevant to you? How are they relevant to you as stakeholders? You know, on a very short level, is there a gap on your wall that you want to fill and have pride? On a more practical level, is there something you can do to change your place, to make your place more unique and connected to its unique place story? So who can tell your story? I mean, that's the next thing to think about. You know, straight off, you can tell your story. Your local schools can tell your story. This was a very simple exercise in Hull, and this was simply using the photography, using the strategy, saying to a bunch of local school children at the beginning of a workshop, how many of you, when you grow up, are going to stay in the place that you were born? How many of you are going to set up businesses and stay here. Almost none of the kids put their hands up, maybe 10%. And by simply doing a workshop that said, look at the photographs of your place, look at the assets and businesses that you have here locally, and then simply finishing the workshop with how many of you will stay in your place now. Virtually 95% of the people put their hands up. And that's a pretty powerful tool to have to a local community, and a very simple one, But then also you can be playful. This was with a project we did with Channel 4, and this was literally taking the words of the people of their place and their positives and their negatives, things they were worried about, and painting the town with their thoughts and their words. So creating a dialogue with the community to say, you are listened to, what you say is important, and it's here. We are showing that. And then as part of this process, is in terms of working with a television station, we then interviewed the local people to their reaction to effectively seeing these stories and thoughts brought to life in their local place. So you can be quite playful with how you engage, but also you can be quite simple. Again, New Haven, and this was the place photography. So effectively, the place photography to celebrate the assets and the people who worked in the place was used for free. The local bus company had some gaps, and the local council effectively used all these assets for free because they had them as part of their palette, and you all have a set of assets. Again, you can see their visual language is very much underplayed here. What's important was that where they were celebrating their local talent. And this was something that not only perhaps might poach some people who might be driving past on the way to Brighton, who might think, oh, I didn't realize those types of businesses were there. Maybe I'll locate here. But it also gave local pride. And again, incredibly cost-effective thing. So Coventry, again, as a city, has a big set of themes and a big set of things to deliver. It's innovation, it's technology. Again, there's a crossover there, which is why I highlighted it. It has other important stories, its car story, its peace and reconciliation story. But again, it's about using the local people and the local assets. You guys are going to change your place. It's our job just simply to listen to you and help distill that into a set of themes and a big idea. So this was an event, a champions group in Jaguar Land Rover, hosted by Jaguar Land Rover. In fact, they even paid for the storybook. They were that engaged with the place. So you're looking at a room of local people, local stakeholders who passionately care about their place. And by getting together, there's definitely no disadvantage in terms of networking, swapping skills, swapping advice, managerial, etc. But also they got together and helped and lobbied the government. They got millions of pounds in. They won City of Culture. That's the people utilizing their local place story. But they didn't just sit on their hands. They thought, well, what else can we do? People all got together. They hired one of the floors in the Shard in London. They went, you know what? We're going to take that money from the city and we're going to bring it back to our city. So they also have a university connection with the Shard. So their story actually does connect and pull across. But they held effectively a high-end event where they invited developers, they invited high-end investors and celebrated their place. One of the other themes that I talked about was peace and reconciliation, which again is one of Coventry's points of difference. You could sit on that theory and go, what's that all about? Or you could do something about it. They created this global event, which was called Rising. And the assets, the visual language, the photography, the typography, all those things are just free assets they can use. What's important is bringing the strategy and the thinking to life. So this was a this was a massive global event. That was one of the things that came out of the strategic thinking of Coventry finding their unique place story. They simply took a theme and brought it to life. One of the other things going back was in one of their champions group, one of the people was there, was a car enthusiast, he was one of the local stakeholders. Chief exec from the council was there too. Person who was interested in cars said, look, we've got this awful ring road that goes around Coventry. Why don't we actually turn that from a negative into a positive? And they had this enormous event, which was a vintage car celebration, which also celebrates the innovation that's happening with the car industry and self-drive cars, amongst other things, that's happening in Coventry right now. So on many levels, things can happen. It's about focusing on about what makes you special. But more importantly, it's about getting together and doing something about it, which you can see here leads to pretty big things, and pretty exciting things. So another example that I've brought, and again, the purpose of these examples are really to challenge and inspire you to think, well, where can we use stuff? Where can things happen? We were very privileged to win the best place brand in the world for our work for South Downs National Park. And part of it was really about just helping activate their themes, help activating their points of difference, with the visual language, how it was activated, where it was activated. And it's everywhere, they've done a massive amount of things. So their visual language was effectively celebrating the gentleness and rollingness, but it was also connecting that story, which was very important, which is their topology. The stuff that happens under the ground is the thing that affects the stuff that happened on top of the ground, in terms of nature, in terms of animals, in terms of literature, in terms of business. So, their visual language then is applied in a multitude of places, whether it be on local newspapers and information, whether it be in the South Downs Centre, whether it be in sculptural signage, which helps, in their case, identify a place that crosses the council boundaries of multiple places. So, but in doing that, it's thinking, how is that story relevant? So this is sustainable wood, which is from the South Downs. So their signage becomes strategic, another one of their stories that effectively is helping them not only be unique, but also be respectful to the environment that they work within. But then also with our visual language, they can take existing assets like posts, and simply by carving in the visual language, they can make them more unique. They can make them stand out and not just be like any old post, help celebrate point of difference, and the other thing that they've achieved, that not many people achieve is a great partnership with people like the National Trust. And that's because they had a visual language, because a logo is something that people always get a bit nervous about, because my logo fights for your logo and it's all a bit of a fight. But with the National Trust, that wasn't the case. The National Trust effectively, I guess, coexisted with them, with one of their assets. Again, you can see even local companies, you can see a South Downs beer here with the visual language used in supplement to their local brand, as well as again, you can see the other things. It's important here that this isn't 100% electric car, because going back to what I was saying earlier, it's about how do we change our behavior? How does the strategy, what is our point of difference, something that makes our point of difference move forward? And then there's the practical, simple things, what's our uniform look like? And again, here is another example of an advertising campaign. But what's important here is about the campaign is about behavior changing. It's saying to local people, don't use your car, use the bus, use local transport, have a different, fresh perspective, and actually respect your environment. Again, assets, photography, visual language, all there for free. So these sorts of things were very, very cheap to produce. Something else is when you think about things like practical things like websites, when it comes to strategy, there's no point in having strategic thinking unless you're going to use it. Again, something that was important to them was unifying over 200 square miles of very different geography. You know, you've got sea, you've got mountains, you've got heathland, you've got forest. So what that meant was, you know, we did a very simple workshop with them. And in that workshop, they were going, we can get this widget that does the weather. We can get this thing, which is about our events. We can get, and then it was reminding them, use your strategy. And this, so very importantly, the most important thing was when you arrive at the website, it unites 200 square miles of geography. It effectively brings together all their assets into one experience, which was fundamentally important to them. Again, the list of assets and places you can use your visual assets goes on and on and on. And as I said earlier, as you saw with the other example, you know, National Trust, they don't have another logo fighting with the National Trust logo. They have very quietly the visual language you can just see on the bottom of the sign on the left-hand side. But more importantly, inside this National Trust experience, unique to place, they're using that visual language to create the and influence the inside displays and information of this National Trust asset, but equally important, this South Downs National Park asset. But then the story carries on, you know, years later, you know, they're creating things like dark skies because they win dark skies status. So the visual language can adapt and modify as the story moves forward to move forward with it. So when we think about ambition, ambition isn't about scale. Ambition is about the stakeholders from the local place and what they're prepared to do and how strong and caring they are about their place. So the visual language in terms of North Knots is celebrating the space, the countryside, the ability to breathe in this. So that very much affects their design and their expression, because every way you can express or illustrate what makes you unique, you should do it. There's quick wins like bunting, but then they also did things like in the local airport, they thought, you know, when our local community get off a plane, we want to remind them that this is a place that we should all be proud of, that there is space to breathe here, you know, that there's something that we should be very proud of, but also we have unique stories. We need to activate our unique stories. So, and we also need to bring our countryside into our town centres. So rather than having traditional local benches, you know, they're planning benches for which the local people can effectively have a local village green in the town centre. But also, you know, when you're thinking about practical things like finger posts to help direct people around the towns, you know, they also utilize one of their other unique stories, which of course is Robin Hood. So why would you have a sign that looks like every other sign when you can help build point of difference and uniqueness to place? So their signs are very much modern because, like all places, you need to look forward, not just nostalgically, passively look backwards. So they've taken their Robin Hood story and they've brought it in a playful way into something very practical, which is their finger post signage. But what's important here as well is each town, even though it used these local assets, had its own unique colors, had its own way, and actually just not using gray is a massive step forward for a place. You know, here you can see on the bottom, you can see their giant new bus shelter, you can see their bins, you can see them, I guess, refreshing assets that already exist. And on the top, you see one of the other towns in North Nottinghamshire, and it has its own unique color, and effectively using and claiming the best stories, as you can see with the Robin Hood story and some of the other stories, which I'll talk about in a minute, but still having point of difference. So you can take something as boring as a car parking sign and make it just feel a little bit more unique and a little bit more special. You can also take your stories and very simply bring them to life. What's lovely here is because you have a very strong set of stakeholders and local community. They got on with it. They took the assets they were given. This was the local historic society did this. They took the visual language, they took the photography, they went to Virgin and they said, look, our train station is grim. When people arrive, it feels really off-putting. Can you help us? Virgin Rail paid for all this. They paid for it. The local people did the work on the ground. They told the local stories. All the assets were there for free. But Virgin, one of the, the train company, they were very happy to have their train station look better. So everybody benefited effectively from getting together and bringing their story to life. Again, within the council, they made it a point to have meeting rooms that reminded them of what are we doing to bring our strategic things to life. So you can see here, one of their rooms was about connectivity. So every time they had a meeting, they were reminded, what are we doing about our connectivity? How are we improving that? So, but also, they went the next level on, in terms of bringing their stories to life. They created a new museum that was effectively born out of the inspiration of the strategic thinking. And that's incredible. So they got a whole new product, a big scale product that came out of them saying, what are we doing about our stories? We haven't really told our pilgrim story. Why not? Let's do it. Let's. And they got together and they created this new asset. Not just that, they thought about things differently. In terms of celebrating the reality, they're still in the process of trying to create their own sculpture as opposed to signpost to celebrate their countryside. And of course, because of that, and because these people are so strong, mighty but small, they were the first country destination to win a bid, which effectively means millions of pounds for the local area. So I guess it's taking a breather there, because it's about you thinking about, okay, these are just some examples of what other people can do. What can we do? That's why we're here. So the Torbay toolkit, this is something that you can all have access to. You'll all be sent. Really, this is a technical tool to say to you, here's our typeface, here's our colors, here's our visual language, here's our photography. So really, we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But showing you what it is introducing you to the themes, to the big idea in a very shorthand way. That's talking about the visual language, talking about your identities, advising you that if you take photographs in the future, what way you should think about those photographs in terms of that creative direction, your color, some expressions, your direction. So really, it's a practical tool here that we're going through this, as I say, introducing these different elements, showing you the different points of difference, your different place, time, color palettes, but also showing how you can soften it and use it very, very quietly as a watermark. So on one hand, saying this is what happens when we bring it all together, but we also can use it separately. And really, that's about where it's relevant. Where do we want to claim all the assets? Where do we want to put Agatha Christie and the other assets up front? Where do we want to all claim Agatha Christie? Where do we all want to claim Tech on the Bay? Where do we not? Where do we want to just focus on our food experience, our fishing experience? Where do we want to say we're a hub, for leisure? Where do we want to say, actually, we're family first, we're being playful with our beaches and other elements. So that's doing that. And then what we have is we have a place story. And really our place story is taking the strategic thinking, and it's something that's only for stakeholders, really. It's about reminding you all of your point of difference. And it's putting that together in terms of photography, making the words of the strategy still strategically focused, but much more accessible. and putting your elements together to remind, stakeholders as a tool of some of those assets and some of those things that may not be your business, but might be a reason for people to locate their business here, or to effectively to stay in your business, or to come back from university and bring that wealth of knowledge back with them. So the storybook, is just, is a simple way of bringing together that thinking. And the more times I look at the photographs, the more I think, when can I come back? It's absolutely wonderful place. And each place equally complements the other. Which speaks for itself, really. Yes. So this brings us back to the important thing, which is our strategic themes and big idea. And I guess challenging you as stakeholders to ask the question, what can you do together to effectively take, this distillation of point of difference and bring it to life in new, exciting ways. So there's the bay in itself, which you all own, and then there's your individual expressions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So as I said, a lot of content there, but then there's a lot of content across Torbay, as you've seen, and you know it as well, a lot better than we do. The key bit with this is, I think, is, as Peter has emphasised again and again, this is not about people sitting back and waiting for the council to do it. It's about everybody doing it, and the whole idea of the approach is to make sure that you have the assets. So you have the story to tell, you have the assets that support the brand, and you have the photography. And the council will contact you after this event so that you can actually get hold of that stuff. They'll let you know how to get hold of it. Because the key bit, and one of the questions we've had already, will people be able to have the toolkit, and will you be able to use it for free? Everything that you have seen here is freely available for all the stakeholders. And that, you can imagine how valuable that photography, just that is, let alone having a brand to play about with as well. So I think that's really important. So as we have urged, in terms of asking questions along the way, we've had some already along the way, but please ask us some more, because that's what we're here for. So use the Q&A function to ask those questions. So we've had a question about where is Torbay naturally inspiring? Where's that fit in all this? Because that seems to have been well received. And the answer is yes, it fits within it. At the end of the day, you can see, I mean, we weren't in this process trying to impact on any existing positioning that, say, English Riviera had or anything like that. So, but if you look at naturally inspiring, well, basically it is everything we've talked about, and it certainly fits with Premier Marine and Natural Experience. Naturally inspiring is something that's been used in the public domain. What you see here, as I say, as Peter said, these aren't strap lines, this is strategy. We're not necessarily saying that you use these in the public domain and in front of customers. You can, right, but they weren't originally designed like that. They were designed as thinking and strategy. We've had another question about how do you measure the success of all of this, which is a really, really great point. And it's very difficult, I think, with place branding. I think because the one thing you can't do with this is say, we will deliver X 100 million of extra investment or you will automatically win this funding bid, or tourism rates will increase by 200%. The important bit with all of this is creating an environment for success. That's the key bit, because this isn't controlling, there isn't an accountability here, but the fact that you have got a stronger external positioning can only help in terms of those elements around investment and tourism and visitors and etc. And obviously it helps locally in terms of pride of place and things like that. So I think the measurement, right, is to say it's almost like other people being able to do their job even better because this now exists. It sets the backdrop. It creates, as I say, that environment for success. Another question was about local young people. So where are they in this? Well, in the photography, there were quite a lot of young people there. And if you see the storybook, there's even more. So across the storybook, there's quite a smattering of young people, and we know how important that audience is, and also how important it is to portray Torbay as a youthful place, and not perhaps just as the way it's perceived a little bit as a place to retire in. And you'll see in a lot of the photography, the imagery and the visual language, there was quite an effort there to make sure that we're showing a contemporary place, because that's important, whether that's from a business point of view, whether that's from our venture lifestyle point of view. It is quite a youthful place. It is contemporary as well. So I think that's important. There's a question here about what's your view on logos and strap lines. I'm going to let Peter answer that one.
Well, I mean, my view is very much, there's a time and a place for both of these things. And I think the most important thing about strap lines is they change, they modify as the place changes. That's why it's very important just to give you strategy. And that strategy, really, you can create multiple slogans or strap lines from. A logo is something that's very important to a business because it wants to distill its identity into one very solid and simple form of communication. A place, that's not so relevant. A place isn't that simple. A place is more, has more furry edges as such. A place has, as we've seen, it doesn't just have natural assets. It doesn't just have shopping. It has businesses. It has communities. It has a multitude of things. And also, I think it's very important that every business from a place should be able to use the assets of the place. And whether that's simply using the photography, or whether that's actually stepping up the next stage and saying, I'm so proud of where my business is located, that I'm going to use a language that has effectively simply is an illustration of, as I say, a distillation of a point of difference. So I think in terms of a place, I have a personal problem with a place just uses their first letter, which happens all too often. B for Belfast, B for Birmingham, B for Blackpool, the list goes on, and then it just communicates nothing. I think when it's communicating or trying to communicate effective thinking in terms of, and lots of places have things that are the same. So, it's important to celebrate those when that's the thing to celebrate. But when you're competing with other places, you want to celebrate your point of difference, and your strategy helps you do that. And I think the most important thing for me is every year you might change your strap line, or every 6 months you might change your strap line, but your point of difference, your strategic point of difference, will stay the same. And that's why it's very important not to think of this as, oh, here's a new set of strap lines. The most important way to think about this is actually, how is it a premier, experience? How do I illustrate that? And there's multiple ways of doing that.
Another one for you, Peter. Torbay had a logo with a wave of the sea and a palm tree, but that had to get changed as it didn't work on printed material. So it had to be changed to be digitally friendly, as in only straight lines. So how will this identity fit in with digital printing?
Absolutely fine. I mean, it's you know, I think with technology today, you know, digital printing is pretty smart. You know, you can print on blocks of wood and concrete with digital printing. So I think that's actually opened a lot of things up. Whereas before, you know, as little as 5 years ago, we were relying on things like lithographic printing, which was about metal plates. You know, now things are opened up, so actually we can be much more expressive with what we print on and the materials that we use. I think, again, I think that any expression of a place is important. None is defunct, but every single year a place has new things to talk about and new things to celebrate, and that's worth remembering.
Okay, we've got one about the process. How did we get to the themes and therefore the creative bits? Well, there was a huge amount of engagement through different methods, from workshops, one-to-one conversations, focus groups, online surveys. So we listened to an awful lot of people. We also didn't start with a blank sheet of paper. We went back to the research that you'd already got, things that had already happened before, because obviously there will be a lot of information in a place. So we did that. And really it's a question then of funneling down to try and get to the key strategic elements that make a place distinct or stand out. Because not many places are unique, but they have very special things. Hence, you know, with, I think, you know, with Brixham, that whole idea of bringing together creativity and fishing and etc. and art and craft and design and industry all in one combination is incredibly powerful, because really there actually probably isn't another place that can match that combination. So I think there was a lot of work went into that, and as Peter said, the visuals are not just random. The visuals are there to tell the story, and those stories were signed off by a steering group that represented the whole of the place. So we did go into quite a lot of effort to make sure that these were reflective of the place. Right, what have we got next? How and when will the style guide be made available? As I say, after this, everybody who's on this call will be contacted by the council, and you'll get a route so that you can get hold of the toolkit, the assets that support the brand, etc. Right, not a question, but a consideration. I wonder whether we should be mindful of making sure we include imagery that depicts activities that aren't dependent on wealth. As an area with large pockets of deprivation, we need to make sure we aren't excluding residents from feeling part of this. I think the visuals are great, by the way. Yeah, I mean, totally agree with that. I mean, we didn't set out, to be fair, to try and include, exclude, and you know, some of the bits where we've got people just walking, cycling, scrambling around, enjoying the natural environment. So this wasn't trying to just show multi-million-pound yachts or anything like that. I suppose there's always a risk when you're trying to show a place off that you err a little bit on that side. But I know, I'm thinking of the photography for Paignton has got kids on the beach with buckets and spades and building sandcastles and running in and out of the water. So we have got the fundamentals, I think, of life in there, as well as perhaps elements that you might think are a little bit more upmarket. Is the term English Riviera now defunct? Absolutely not. That is an organisation, that's their brand and etc. And as I said with this, we never set out in this, you know, to affect anybody's existing brand. This should be additionality in terms of what we can do with it. And the fact that Torbay didn't have a story, maybe English Riviera gave it a story from a visitor perspective. It certainly didn't have a strong external story around investment, people relocating because of work, live, all sorts of things like that. I think that's what we're trying to do. So this isn't taking anything away from anybody. It should only be about adding things in terms of what they're able to do. Another question there about leveling up, which has been launched today. And you were closer to it than me, because it says it includes increased pride of place, people's satisfaction with their town and location, and engagement in local culture and community. Well, if that is part of it, that's great. As with all of these things, I'll reserve judgment till I've read all the detail. But it is a really important part, I think, of this. And one of the things that you'll be aware of is all of the funding programs that are out there now. Towns Fund, Future High Street Fund, Shared Prosperity is on the way. Government requires you basically to have this sort of shared narrative and place-led view of what you're doing, and you aren't going to succeed without it. So the fact that that is now in place can only help for future funding bids. I know you've had some success with those already with Paignton, but it will help right across the area, as well as with obviously private sector investment. So that's all cool. Any more questions? Let me have a look here, see if there's anything else that you've got. Right, has anybody got anything else they want to raise? Because I think I've gone through all of the questions we've got so far. Still your chance to stick stuff on Q&A, and Peter and I will do our level best to answer it. But okay, well, if there isn't anything else, you're all busy people, so we don't want to keep you on beyond what's needed. So I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it inspiring in terms of what you can do. And that is the key bit, really, is about, this is about you doing it. And I noticed there's another comment there about, will permission from the council be needed to use the logo? Absolutely not. It's not. This is not the council's brand. It's the place's brand, and the council will be the first to say that. What is important is that all of this is used correctly, and that's why obviously you need access to the right assets, the toolkit, etc., so that you can use it correctly, because obviously we've got to portray the place in the best way possible. But the success of this, and Peter and I have seen it in lots of places, it really depends on you all getting involved, thinking about the opportunities, pushing the boundaries, being innovative. And as you've seen through all the examples Peter's gone through, there's myriad ways of telling that story, you know, from a block of stone to a vinyl, to a prospectus, to signage, you name it, you can do it. So we hope you have fun doing that. And as Peter said, particularly, you have got an amazing story to tell. I mean, just running through the imagery, if that's all you looked at, it sells the place $1 million. It really does. So thanks very much for being on the session. Hope you've enjoyed it, and have a fantastic rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.